All righty. It is 7:30. This is the C4 Metro Subcommittee on February the 19th. Your chair is Commissioner Savas. Commissioner Savas, the meeting is yours.
Great, thank you, Jamie. I gather our trusted Counselor Sherman is not with us this morning.
Correct. He's out today. And
Okay, he's not today.
he's going to check in, but I'm taking over from here on out. So
okay. Great, Counselor Callahan. I was aware of that. And I was also, just for everyone's knowledge, because Counselor Sherman is on MPAC, I was actually hoping both of you could participate in the C4 Metro Subcommittee piece, which is primarily for those who don't know, our primary purpose is to prepare for our MPAC and JPAC meetings. That's our primary purpose, and other things so we can do, but just want to point that out. So my hope, as I talk to Councilor Sherman, is that if available, he could do both, attend here, and also Councilor Callahan, great to have you on board, and hope to see you at both here and at C4 regular on Thursday evenings, first Thursday. So with that, we have some new faces, so I thought we'd just go around and do introductions. Paul Savas, co-chair of the C4 Metro Subcommittee. And next on my screen, I see Pamela Burback.
Good morning. I'm the boring CPO and then Summit and to C4. They selected me for C4.
Great. Good to have you back. Councilor Callahan.
Morning, Joshua Callahan, Half Valley City Council President. Councilor Sherman does intend to continue to attend. He said just today he had to be off. So,
okay, no worries. Thank you, Commissioner Mitchell.
Morning, Mike Mitchell, Oregon City Commission.
John Sarah.
John Sarah, TriMet Local Government Affairs. Thank you, Chair.
Dwight Brashear.
Good morning, everyone. Dwight Brashear. I am the Transit Director for the City of Wilsonville.
Thank you. Councilor Pratt.
Valerie Pratt, 12th City Council. And Mr. Brashear, I think that's the first time I've not seen you with the hat on.
Thank you. Mayor Buck.
Good morning, Joe Buck, Mayor of Lake Oswego.
Thank you. And Mayor Milch.
Michael Milch, Mayor of Gladstone.
Thank you. Mayor O'Neill.
Sean O'Neill, Mayor of Wilsonville.
Okay. And thank you. And I see Councilor Lewis.
Good morning, Christine Lewis, Metro Council.
Okay. And our trusted staff, Trent Wilson, Karen Burig, and Jeff Owen, I see on my screen, but I don't see their faces. So we'll get right to the agenda. Give me a second while I pull that up. Okay, I guess the first up on our list here is our JPAC updates. And Jeff, I guess you're presenting.
Well, hi, everyone. So Jeff and I'll just introduce myself. I'm Karen Burig. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager. And so I have helped staff this C4 Metro Committee for many, many years and through many, many regional flexible funds processes. So I'm here partnering with Jeff. And Jeff, you want to give yourself an introduction?
Absolutely. Good morning. Jeff Owen, Principal Planner, Transportation Planning, as part of Karen's group for Clackamas County.
Right. And so today, what you'll find in your packet, there is a link to the JPAC materials. And if you guys want to peruse those, that is wonderful. We are going to start off with and talk with the first agenda item, which is talking about the regional flexible funds. And then towards the end of the agenda, we'll have our TPAC updates. And that's where we'll also have members from the city's TPAC representative come on and share what we learned and what was talked about at the TPAC meeting. And often there's a relationship between TPAC and JPAC. And so that's kind of how we see the meeting kind of moving forward. So if that's okay, I will jump into the first agenda item on the packet. That sound good? Okay. So what we're here talking about today is the 2028-2030 regional flexible funds allocation process. And this time around, so this is basically, just so everybody's on the same page, this is all about how the region will end up spending the federal funds that come into the region. And it is done every 3 years. We've looked at and we project out the regional flexible funds. So this particular year, so I want to just give just base information so we're all on the same page, is within the regional flexible funds, they break it into kind of 2 steps. So you have the step 1 process, which ultimately are the programs and the committed funds that flow through Metro. And then there's step 2. And step 2 are the projects. They're the ones where we see in our communities specific improvements made, investments made. So I'm going to focus a lot on step 1, and then I'll let Jeff lead the step 2 process. We'll have some time for conversation in between the 2. One of the things I wanted to comment and why we're really talking here about step 1 kind of more in depth is that in this particular round, there is this opportunity to do a new project bond. And so we are at a place where there'll be a discussion about that at the next JPAC meeting. So I have put together, your packet has a whole lot of information, and I put together a few slides that'll help us through this process. So I'm just going to share that. And the slides are in the packet as well. Let's see, hold on. Here we go. And it looks like I opened up, I'm gonna share my screen. It's a PDF. I'm going to share a PDF is what I'm going to do. Oops. I'll need to be, the host has disabled the screen sharing. So you change that. So I am, I'm going to go look and just grab the PowerPoint because I'm more familiar with running those than trying to talk off of a PDF. So give me just a second. And I am going to, oops, a slideshow. I'm going to go from the beginning. And then I am going to make that. Okay. All right. I think I've been sharing my screen the entire time, so you got to see my internal processes. So do you guys see my screen? No. Okay.
Not yet.
Here we go. All right. Now I think I'm sharing my screen. Do you guys see a regional flexible funds updates? Is that where we're at? All right, perfect. Well, first of all, we've been hearing about this particular round for a while, and I just wanted to bring us all back because there's a lot of conversation that goes into developing the regional flexible funds program. And so here are a few times just C4 Metro has discussed and heard about the 2028-2030 regional flexible funds project. So back in April 2024, so about a year ago, Metro staff came in and talked about the work and kind of set the foundation about, hey, we are going to be moving forward with this regional flexible funds process. And they also talked about the fact that within step 1, there is a portion of step 1, which is called step 1A, that is the region's commitment to paying off past bonds. And for the most part, those past bonds have been there to fund various high capacity transit projects that have been able to be implemented throughout the region. And there's also been other types of projects, just smaller amounts, that have also been included within that bonding category. But it's a really important part of the whole step 1 process. So step 1 also includes how Metro itself is funded, as well as various programs. Some of the programs you might be familiar with are Safe Routes to Schools programs, Regional Travel Options program. But the one we're going to really focus on today is this step 1A, which has to do with the bonding. Because at this moment in time, there's additional bonding capacity to be able to be thought about whether we want a new project bond. And so that was introduced back in April. And there's been a lot of work. And between the April and the decision that was done in June is that a program direction for the regional flexible funds process was developed and discussed about. So back in May, Metro provided some responses to the C4 committee about questions they had. And staff talked about kind of what the program direction could be. And in June, JPAC adopted a program direction, which basically outlines how, in the broad sense, JPAC was interested in expending the regional flexible funds. And so within that, there was also program direction around this new project bond, but there was still a lot of pieces that needed to be worked out. So then in July, there was an update about the new project bond. In September, staff came back and provided, there was a series of processes, just so we remember, there was a process where jurisdictions could submit projects to this new project bond. And then there's a separate process, and we'll talk about that later, about the step 2 projects. But we were kind of moving forward with that. So C4 Metro also had an opportunity to hear about that at that time. And so we're kind of coming back and being able to talk to you today because tomorrow at the JPAC meeting, there'll be deeper discussion about the Step 1A bond and trying to bring it into focus, what actually will move forward into the public comment period. And that's a decision that that JPAC will end up making in March. And that is the decision about what moves forward into the public comment period. Okay, so here we go. This is, again, a reminder, but really what was in that program direction. It's the program direction that was approved by Metro, approved both by JPAC and Metro back in June of 2024. And the program direction tells us that there's this interest in for the new bond projects. They should be regional and corridor scale, and they must be one of the following. One, either the capital investment grants, and those are often and most likely the high capacity transit projects. Capital investment grants are a part of a program that the Federal Transit Administration has, but it's a way to fund those high capacity transit projects. Another category, and this is kind of broadening where we had spent project bond funds before, but really looking at those last and first mile transit investments, including safe access to transit. And then transit vehicle priority investments, such as Better Bus or various transit signal priority investments. So that was all kind of pulled together within this program direction that we use as our kind of North Star as we're moving forward through this process. So back in September, projects were submitted from throughout the region. I'll just kind of go into this. This is where we're at, but there are projects submitted throughout the region. They were looked at by Metro and looked at for various criteria, and they've been narrowed down into, let's see if I get this right, 5 different projects. There we go. There are 5 different projects that are left there that are being considered. And so one of the things that Metro was looking at and staff has prepared was various scenarios, various ways we could potentially move these projects forward. And so they put together 8 scenarios. I also wanted to just mention what they call the allocation ranges go between $64 million and $84 million. So that's if they choose to bond this additional money, we'll have a capacity to fund projects up to that amount in this Step 1A category. So that's what the allocation ranges are, somewhere between 60 million and 84 million. And then these were the guidance for each of the scenarios. So they put together ways that we could kind of think about how this bonding could be done. So they put together 4 scenarios that really focused on regional and corridor scale investments, and it balanced the different bond goals. So those were the first 4 scenarios and different ways we could think about it. There was a scenario that was specifically about thinking how we could get investments across the region. There was a scenario about really focusing on the projects that would give us the most significant amount of identified funding leverage for identified funding sources. And then the 7th and 8th scenario really had to do with, okay, what if we really focused on the transit capital specific, the high capacity transit investments, and that could be funded by this SIG category, the capital investment grant category. So those are the ones they put together. So this is a chart. It's very complicated. It's in your packet, but I provided here to give you background, right, on what is kind of foundational to this conversation. So as I was just saying, is these first 4 scenarios talk about the regional corridor scale, and the 5 projects that are continuing to move forward within this conversation are these, and I'll take a moment to talk about that. So there's the 82nd Avenue Transit Project. There is a Tualatin Valley Highway Transit Project. There's the Sunrise Corridor Gateway Project, Burnside Bridge Transit Priority Access, and the Montgomery Streetcar Extension. So those are the 5 projects that are currently being considered, and they made these different assessments for the scenarios. As you can see in the scenarios, in the first 4, there were investments made in each of those projects and at different amounts. It's really what the difference between scenario 1 through 4 is, and they have different amounts and the amounts range, as we talked about before, between 60 million and 84 million. That's the amount of capacity they think they have. And then as we look at scenario 5, 6, 7, and 8, those are scenarios that would include only investment in some of the projects, not all of the projects. And specifically, the scenarios 7 and 8 are for what would be considered SIG projects. And SIG projects are the high capacity transit projects, and those would be the 82nd Avenue, the TV Highway, and Montgomery Park. So that's kind of, as we're talking about scenarios, that's what we mean. So TPAC had a long conversation about these various scenarios and the best way to provide input into the JPAC conversation. And coming out of that, out of the TPAC conversation, there really was support for an overall comprehensive approach, and looking at how projects were selected and making sure that there was projects invested throughout the region, kind of a geographic balance. So there was definitely support for that. There was interest, there was concern about these kind of different categories or different funding amounts, and that some of the funding amounts in the scenarios wouldn't be sufficient enough. So they wanted to make sure that there were minimum funding levels for each of the projects. They definitely are looking out into the future and want JPAC to consider a long-term financial strategy and consider risk mitigation. And they also said, hey, these scenarios need additional refinements and we have additional data need. There still is more information that's needed. So with that, tomorrow at JPAC, JPAC will be broadly asking for input, right? So they're having a conversation tomorrow that will lead to a request for guidance next month, which is March, and that for the step 1A scenario or projects that should move into the public comment process. So that's really kind of what we're prepping for. And so there's the conversation about that. And so within the JPAC packet, they kind of proposed these two different questions for JPAC to think about and what they want. They're hoping the conversation will revolve around. So they have two directions for the bond package. One direction for the bond package would be a proposal which reflects diversified transit investment types and are spread across the region. So as what I just talked about, that would be a bond proposal that we're kind of in that one scenario 1 to 4 that had investments across the region. Or they want to hear about whether or not there's JPAC support for a bond proposal focusing on transit projects to position, right, that are ready, what are considered ready enough to leverage federal CIG funds. So, or should the bond package really focus just on kind of those scenarios 7 and 8, which are really the SIG, again, the capital investment projects. So they're thinking that the conversation's going to talk about that. That's the way that they want to present the question for conversation. And then they'll also ask, do members have any further direction in shaping the bond proposal package to bring forward? So all of this stuff is a lot of information that we've talked about across time, and we're really here today to be able to support your conversation. I'm going to take a break in the slideshow. I'll pull it down and we'll talk just about step 1A. I think a couple of things that are important is that we have been hearing and we've been working really hard to understand what's going on around the region. And we have heard a lot of support for investment for projects across the region. And how is it that we can kind of lean into and support that program direction? And what that program direction is saying, hey, how can we think about projects that are not just in kind of the typical CIG category? So that's some of the stuff that we've been hearing, but this is the time for you and your partners to kind of have a conversation and be able to share with the folks that are the JPAC members what you've been hearing and kind of thoughts that you've had. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point now that we all know what they're going to talk about tomorrow and allow you to have your conversation.
Great. Thank you, Karen, for a great presentation. Sorry I missed your name. My eyeballs aren't working so good on my little tiny screen that I have here today. So again, thank you for your brilliant work and your presentation. Mayor Milch.
I want to know, based on what we've seen going on the last 30 days at the federal level, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that these funds are even going to be distributed to jurisdictions?
So I'm probably as confident as everyone else around the screen. I really think that I think that's a very difficult question to answer. And I also think that it really comes down to, ultimately it's going to be JPAC and Metro that move forward. But at this point in time, I'm not quite sure. But I can also say, though, that in the past, federal funds have continued to flow through Metro. And we've had a lot of success with this program, and that we hope that we continue to see that. So that's about all I can say on that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment about that. As I see it, the federal funds really are, really funds where this is our opportunity to get some of our money back, right? So to speak, that it's fuel tax monies, I guess, and other monies, but basically getting our share versus it being gobbled up by other parts. And whether we're a donor state or whether we are getting our return on investment or more is always a question I always kind of consider or wonder about. But that said, I think it's safe harbor to kind of assume that we will get, funding will follow our traditional years. But there have been a number of things here in the last few weeks that have given pause in a number of arenas but that's not a discussion for today, really. I know it is, but it's nothing we can control. So we'll just do the best we can. And I see Mayor Buck, you have your hand up. So floor
Thanks.
is yours.
Thank you, Commissioner. What are the kind of mechanics of these capital investment grants? Because I mean, no matter what, it sounds like at least a couple of the projects, are those type of projects. So we get make the rough investment, and then what? How do they apply? These are competitive grants. This money is like earmarked state by state. How does it work?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question. Are you specifically asking about the step 1A
Yeah.
funds? Are you talking about all of the federal funds that come through? So maybe
No.
you can be more narrow.
Okay. Well, these capital investment grant projects.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe I don't understand how any of this works. So what are those? That's a different program. They're leveraging other funds. So the RUFA is one program, and then there's this capital investment grant program, but that's a separate application. Yeah. So I'm just trying to understand the mechanics.
So it looks like Commissioner or Councilor Lewis, did you want to respond to that?
Sure, I think maybe I'm understanding where Mayor Buck's questions are coming from. Maybe John's gonna bat clean up for me. But what we call our Regional Flexible Fund Program is actually several different federal funding flows that are essentially allotments that every MPO across the country gets a piece of the pie. We blend those several sources of funding and do a 3-year cycle where we draw down the dollars and bond against them in this step 1. So step 1 is, as we were talking about, program, but we have a potential for a bond program because we've always had a bond program. In the past, the bond program, very frankly, has been cooked up by a couple of staff at TriMet, a couple of staff at Metro. And the reason this is different and new this year is because we made the decision last summer to have a community-led, decision maker-led process about if we were going to do bonding, how much bonding, and what kind of projects they would fund. So that's where this is feeling like a different grant than you've seen in past RUFA cycles. Mayor, is that helping answer the question?
Yeah, no, thank you. I got that part. But what is the CIG, Capital Improvement Grant?
I'll pass it over to John for that. And so that's not changing the color of money from our funding side. That's potential match dollars that are available only for transit projects. And John can describe the requirements for CIG.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. And hello, Mayor Buck. Good morning. Yeah, the FTA CIG CIG program, it's a federal bucket of money through the Federal Transit Administration. It's a discretionary grant program that funds transit capital investments. So it's a lot of high capacity transit that it's funding. It is competitive in the fact that there is a certain amount of money that's ascribed to this bucket of funding. But the way that it works is you basically meet the criteria the way that it's worked in the past, and that we don't have any reason to expect it won't work now, is that you basically meet the criteria, and as long as you are meeting it to a certain threshold, you get that funding from the federal government. Basically, it's more complicated than that, but that is basically what it is. It's a federal discretionary grant bucket of funding.
Okay, thank you. And we don't. I mean, I guess nothing's been announced about changing the criteria or whatnot. It seems like, this new administration is kind of changing the funding criteria for everything else. I don't see why, education.
Yeah, it gets a little complicated. There was new criteria that was just brought out at the very end of the last administration. The new administration rolled that back, so it has gone to a previous state. But that is not anything new at this point. That's something that we've been working under the framework of already. That's how we got funding for the Better Red project, I believe. So right now we're not working outside the norm. This is still operating as expected. And right now, I mean, our perspective is that we just need to continue working to, plan for success here, because we don't have any reason yet to believe that these funds won't be available to us.
So thank you so much for that. Okay, so like let's take for instance the 82nd Avenue project. So if it's or if the plan is to provide some of these rougher funds, let's say the $30 million, to 82nd Avenue, then what? So then TriMet goes and says, hey, we just got this $30 million, our region's allocated to us from these other buckets. And then you sit on that until you get this other capital improvement grant, then you do the project. How does it work?
Yeah, so the major criteria for the CIG program is that they will, for this level of grant, for this amount of money that we're going for, they will provide 50% of the project cost. So the major criteria is us proving that we have the other 50% of that project cost. This would be a significant portion of that 50% of our local match. So it allows us to go in and get that federal grant agreement for the CIG funding.
Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful. And do we have, for these 5 projects, do we have like anything that shows like what is the cost of the full cost of these projects?
So that material, I believe, is available within, I'll have to look closely in the JPAC packet. I don't think, and Jeff, help me out here, I don't think we included that within this particular packet. But I do know that there are details like that I believe TPAC was interested in being able to truly understand kind of how we refine this across time. Because kind of how I started off is that this is a conversation that happened started back in April, and each of these projects that are moving forward are at a different place, and each of them are being refined a little bit more with each month. And so those that information continues to evolve. And I do know that right now that Metro is again kind of bringing together the most recent information about project costs, overall, when these projects will be completed, how much money are they expecting to leverage, that kind of detail.
And just quickly, this is Jeff Owen, part of the support team here for Mayor Buck and others. That information definitely does exist, and we're happy to, if it's helpful to kind of pull that and send that back out as a little bit of an after meeting action. We can definitely do all the nomination materials that went into Metro definitely included a bit of that information of total project cost. Effectively, all the numbers in the packet are that small piece of a bigger cost. So yes, we can definitely get that out to you soon.
I'm gonna be a little bit risky here. And there's a saying, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So, that's where I come in, right? So Mayor, I appreciate your question, and I think that when I hear the word criteria, I think staff responded to that. As far as on the federal side of that criteria, we also have the opportunity, as I recall back, and anyone please correct me, that we have our local criteria that we establish, and every cycle, whether it's RUFA or it's MTIP or STIP, whatever, that criteria can change, and we kind of shape it to maybe to meet our needs or RTP, or whatever it may be. So there's the local aspect of this. And I think there's been a tradition here in this MPO where that flexible funds, those RFFA flexible funds, have been kind of more dedicated to the CIG capital projects as opposed to the other elements that in the earlier slides that Karen presented. For example, first, last mile, I guess I have a question here, and whoever wants to jump in and respond to it is that are we just as eligible in total funding if we were hypothetically we can't change this today, which is more of a hypothetical question, but if we were to invest all the money in first, last mile, is the bucket the same size regardless of a bonding capacity? Putting bonding capacity aside, is the federal stream the same size if we invest in something different as opposed to CIG into first, last mile? I see Councilor Lewis shaking her head up and down. So thank you. I think that's what I assumed the answer was, yes. So again, traditionally we started out last year with the fact that we've traditionally invested in CIG, these large projects. TriMet's been the major recipient provider of those, in areas around the region. And our approach this time was to make it, I guess, insert the word flexible, but to do things like project development and so forth, so we can actually get some of these projects or areas that are underserved, at least this is Paul speaking, underserved, to get them a start, to get a shot in the arm, catalyst, spark to make these projects become larger capacity transit projects in the future. But you got to start somewhere, and typically these projects have been traditionally, again, to these larger scale projects that have been further developed. So I think my comments in months past and recent is the concern that of the two categories we being the metro region have been responding to has been some of these capital projects versus like the Sunrise project, which has been more project development. And the criteria was the same when they were being measured, but yet they were two different categories. So at the local level, that was my concern. And it just seemed that we ought to be able to rank them more fairly. So previous rankings of these under the same criteria, I just thought was a little odd, and maybe didn't some projects shine better that fit the criteria for high capacity, but maybe they didn't fit it for what we originally signaled to staff at JPAC earlier in the year. That's my long-winded question and so forth. So anyone want to chime in on that, staff or Councilor Lewis, as to whether or not in the future we can look at these opportunities and maybe be more flexible with it. I'm always struggling with that word flexible as to what actually is flexible about this. If we continue to do the same thing, I think we need to leverage the aspect of being flexible. And I'm trying to, in a way, I'm making a pitch for the underserved areas, I guess, how we get underserved areas more advanced and more into the flow of things so we can catch up. That's been my concern for a long time. So I said a lot. Any other questions for staff or anyone who want to jump in? Floor is open. Wow. Okay. Oh, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, I guess I would just respond to some of what you were just saying by thinking that we're past the point where the scoring criteria is in play, right? We started with more projects that were interested in the bonding capacity, and the scores and other conversations have helped these 5 corridors and projects move to the top for further discussion. And I think at this point, it's about how much each project gets, which is both a technical question about kind of where the cutoff on different levels of project completeness are, and the assurity of, with which amounts of funding they're going to draw down which amounts of potential match. So it's a political and a technical question now, and I think the scores are behind us. I do think in future, we should be more precise with the questions that we're asking and scores to match up to program. The other thing I'll say is we still have step 2, and step 2 is the traditional RUFA process that we will be able to again, make sure that we have good projects from our part of the region. And we've seen a great swing over the past 6 years where basically in year 1, Clackamas County did really, really well. We got almost everything funded. And then 3 years later, we barely had any projects in the development stage. So we didn't actually have that much in the pot to be competitive with. So I think that the fits and starts around getting something to the process where it can actually be in a RUFA consideration, that takes significant work by a local jurisdiction. And we have some TA that Metro has started to introduce, particularly for smaller jurisdictions. I advocate for that. Kathy Heisey, when she was city council in Milwaukee, really helped put the seed with staff. So I think there's more of that project development work that we should see if it can be funded out of RUFA into future cycles.
Thank you, Councilor. Appreciate it. Mayor Milch.
When I look at this chart in various scenarios, some of them seem to allocate about 2/3 of the requested bond proceeds to each project. Some of them give 100% of the requested amount, but zero to other projects. Going back to the question earlier about how much the total cost of these projects, if a project gets zero allocation, if we choose one of those scenarios, does that basically kill this project? Are they relying so much on this source that elimination of these bonds would basically eliminate a project? Do you happen to know?
So I'll answer that question in the fact that it will be different for each project and what the impact might be. It may be delay. It may be that, and that's probably what may happen with each of them if they don't get their portion or the portion of the step 1A bond that they have requested, or maybe a smaller amount. But I do know, and so we talked about this a little bit, about how the 82nd Avenue and the Tualatin Valley Highway project are both looking for funding that will help support these capital investment grants. And that is basically helping to provide the local match. And so those projects will probably look for other places for that local match to be able to move those projects forward. And each of them are in kind of a different place. For the Sunrise Corridor project, there has been a lot of recent activity, and the state has invested in doing a lot of work right now. And again, that particular project would need to look for other funding sources to be able to move it to the next step. Many of us have kind of talked about and heard about the work that's being done on the Burnside Bridge. And this is one small piece of a broader project. So again, they're looking to pull together funding from many different sources. And then as well with the Montgomery Park streetcar project, that's more aligned with the other. They would be looking at that capital investment grant, and these funds really do help support that local match of that. So each one is a little different. I'm not saying that not having investment right now will cause the project to completely halt, but it's probably important to have momentum and keep that momentum with the different projects. I do know that each of the projects are being asked to go back and figure out whether or not, at what amount can they make that next step. And so take this information that Metro has put together, and they did it in a very thoughtful way to help provide for conversation. So there's I'll cede the floor to Mayor Buck.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Karen. Well, just to hear from the group, I think would be helpful for me and Commissioner Savas. I think tomorrow we've been advocating rather strenuously for this regional approach, right? And I've asked Chair Gonzalez there if Metro staff can prepare even a retrospective to look at how these past RUFA dollars bonded have been invested regionally, because it's my understanding that most of the money has not gone to the outer edges of the region. It's been more centrally contained. But it'd be good to know that, as Councilor Lewis stated, we're trying to take a different approach this year. But if that, so there's one project on that list. It's Clackamas project, it's Sunrise project. So I mean, if this group, I mean, if the jurisdictions throughout Clackamas are not interested in that project, we want to know that, because otherwise we're going to be putting it all out there, making sure that this regional goal that was kind of part of our initial conversations at JPAC as we set forth with this gets met. And I also, I think a couple of these projects, especially like the Burnside Bridge, I mean, this is that's a $1 billion project, I mean, that's way down the road. I mean, for God's sakes, I've been talking about the Interstate Bridge project ever since I became an elected official, almost over a decade ago. So it's so I mean, some of these, whereas Sunrise, I mean, that is a long project that is that is ready, is ready to go the next step, get to the further engineering so that can be a project that can be realized for Clackamas County. And, same with Montgomery Park. I mean, these are just like massive projects, and this is like not even just a portion of the funding. It's like drop in the bucket funding for those projects. So I'm surprised to even see them on the list. It just doesn't seem like it's a good use. So the one scenario, the kind of, regional scenario that takes the top 3 projects like TV Highway, 82nd, those are projects that are definitely more ready to go, where this money, and Sunrise, where this money is going to make a significant difference. But if folks here think otherwise, it'd be good to hear that for us.
Thank you, Mayor. John.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just had a quick follow-up to Mayor Milch, and actually, Mayor Buck, I think this dovetails with your question as well. But for TriMet's projects, and thank you, Karen, that was a great summary. I just wanted to add a little bit. For TriMet's projects, I don't believe that it would kill them if we didn't get this funding right now, but I would say that this has been a traditional funding source for most of our high-capacity transit projects in the past. So this is a typical way that we get local match for these major projects that we do. And Mayor Buck, what I wanted to say to you in response to your question was that I believe 2 of the most recent cycles for REFA for the CIG funding made significant local match to both the Orange Line and the Green Line, which were both developed to serve Clackamas County specifically also. So recent REFA cycles have gone to this county with projects like that. Thank you.
That's good to hear. We can't wait to see the results from Metro staff. We appreciate them putting it together.
Yeah, that has been traditionally, as I call it, and I'm not picking on anyone here at all. I'm just going to point this out, is that the Orange Line, for example, has basically got 2.5 stops in Clackamas County. One at Park Avenue, one near Maine and Washington, and barely the one off of it's right on the border practically near Johnson Creek, the station there. And so we have a little stub out of that huge, large project. So the proportionality of what is in Orange Line or Green Line, the proportionality of what's in Clackamas and what is in Portland is significantly Portland. And yet, I've been arguing for years that if we don't help out the areas that are really underserved, we're never going to be able to catch up. I've been trying for years to get regional balance included in our RTP goals, and a number of goals that we do something to change the paradigm where we get regional balance. We don't just spread it regionally when it's already in balance. We actually do something to counterbalance it. And, that'd be scenario 9, which doesn't exist, but I don't know what we call scenario 9, but maybe in the future we can talk about that. But, I'm here today thinking just to advocate for, hopefully with your support, advocate for scenario 5, which at least is better than nothing. We're getting something. We're not correcting the imbalance. And if you look at the dollars being spent there, 15, the smallest portions, Clackamas, that doesn't do anything to correct the imbalance. But there again, that's a conversation for the future. So John, your hand's up.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. As always, I appreciate that comment. And as always, I do want to make sure that we are partnering with you to address that concern, because that is serious and something that we want to help with. But sort of just for fun, I also did want to comment that, as you and I have talked about, we did intend to take the Orange Line much farther than we were able to. And we had a previous project in the past, the South-North Line, where we had that intention as well, and we weren't able to do that. So certainly we have tried to get at this in multiple ways in the past, but have not been successful. So I just wanted to make that comment as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And John, you and I had this conversation before, and I always, not unlike, I'm not going to pick on 82nd Avenue, I'm not going to pick on TV Highway, but both of them have a tremendous amount of transit already, including light rail, right? So we're doubling down, tripling down on transit in areas that are pretty darn well served, and yet there's other areas that have zero service. So that's my concern. And whether that's in TriMet Service District or it's outside of TriMet Service District, the fact is that the deserts have nothing. So I've always been trying to fight for the little guy, and maybe being a commissioner in Clackamas County is a full-time job in that regard. But man, we certainly need to make the investment. So I don't necessarily look at the transit investments that they have to be high capacity to provide the basic service of first and last mile. We got to start somewhere, and that practical means of just getting that basic service is what I'm advocating for here today. So thank you, John. Commissioner Mitchell.
Yeah, I'll just say I support the regional approach also. I think, there's a lot of diminishing returns. We keep pushing high transit areas in areas that are already well served, as Commissioner Savas said, and we've got a majority of Clackamas County unserved, and we won't seem to be addressing that balance. And I know Commissioner Savas has been fighting that fight for years. So whatever my 2 cents is worth, there it is. The regional approaches make the most sense, make the only sense to me.
Thank you, Commissioner. Karen?
So I just wanted to let folks know that I did drop into the chat kind of a link to materials that were provided by Metro staff back in May. And so it's a link to the C4 Metro packet, May packet. And on page 13 of that PDF packet, there's a lot, again, there's a lot of information there, but really I think 13 shows kind of the investments that have been made as a part of the step 1 A category, the amounts of money and the projects. And so I believe, Mayor Buck, that's the information that you were looking for. And I just wanted to acknowledge that Metro staff had provided that to us. So.
Thank you, Karen. That's very helpful.
Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. I guess that's for the rest of the presentation. So Karen, you want to proceed?
Okay, I'm gonna pass things over to Jeff to let him lead in speaking. Jeff, do you want me just to continue the presentation that I've got up?
Yeah,
Okay,
if you
I'm gonna
could,
share
if you
my
could,
screen
please.
and then I'll let Jeff. And should we also at this point bring in Laura Turway?
Yes, that'd be great if Laura's ready to join. Yep.
Go ahead.
And we can keep this fairly quick. So we just have 2 more slides to share with you. So real quick, if we zoom back out to the larger regional flex fund, kind of, I use the word umbrella of kind of expected total funds. What we've just been discussing there was step 1, that are kind of those programmatic or longer term commitments with bonding, et cetera. Separately now, we're going to step over to step 2, which is and has been and is projected to remain kind of the competitive bucket, where jurisdictions around the region can submit project applications that are typically more of a smaller capital project. Generally speaking, more in the range of like $2 to $8 million is kind of a general range. There's a typo. Unfortunately, we try hard to not have any typos in your materials, but the Lake Oswego request there that's on the screen has been corrected on the screen in your packet. I think it was, unfortunately, it was a much lower value of only $100,000 that was incorrect. That was more, I think, speaking to match. So what's on the screen now are all 6 projects that have been submitted from within Clackamas County jurisdictions. So currently we have 6. They're listed on the screen. And these again have been submitted back in the fall, kind of similar to the step 1 timeframe. These are being evaluated by the team and some consultants that the Metro team is using as to how these project applications speak to criteria for the step 2 competitive program bucket. In your packet, we did also include fact sheets. So part of the large submittals into the Metro program, each project developed a 2-pager. don't get the wrong idea that it was not hard to submit these projects. All the projects on the screen went through a pretty rigorous series of questions and applications, but they also created 2-pagers where the information is a little more digestible. So we've included all 6 of the submittal 2-pagers into your packet, so you can glance at those and get a little more of an idea of kind of where the project is, what type of improvements it is proposing. Generally speaking, they're more about active transportation connections that would be supportive of the overall program direction. So kind of biking, walking, important connections, often with freight access as well and access to jobs. So our brief update for you today on step 2 is this simple reminder that we're in the middle of the process. There have been 6 of those submitted. What we do know is from all around the region, ours included, there are far more asks of the step 2 program than what the step 2 program can afford. This is typical every cycle, so that's nothing new. And what we have in front of us is a window where we're just about to learn more from the Metro evaluators on March 7th. There will be discussion and new information presented from the Metro team about how all of the applications for step 2 around the region were scored, essentially kind of how they stack up to the criteria. So we're just about to have a lot more information about how the Metro team views all those submittals. But what we wanted to make sure and ask of you today for your direction and your guidance is in the past cycles of the same program of money, the same structure, there has been an opportunity in May to submit priorities if that's the desire of C4 and C4 Metro from within our county. And so, basically, again, the request is, exceeds the amount available. And so there's either that opportunity to just let the scores, kind of lie as they are once we know that information, or if you would like to develop some criteria, develop some evaluation from just within the Clackamas County portion of those 6 projects. In order to kind of wrap up here and open it back up for discussion, we wanted to highlight a couple of these meeting dates on the screen that are important parts of this discussion that are just about to occur. The main points here is that tomorrow morning, JPACT will touch on this topic mostly for step 1. Into March, just next month, there will be much more information known on both step 1 and step 2 and how those pieces are shaping up. And then the public comment period is an important window that starts on March 24th. So that would seek out much larger public comment from all around the region, anyone who's interested on potential slate of what the program is looking to fund in both step 1 and step 2. And then in May, there is an opportunity there again. If you would like us at CTAC, your supporting technical committee made up of all the jurisdictional reps within the county, if you would like us to kind of work on any certain evaluation criteria or assessments, we're happy to do that and bring that back to you for consideration. That window to submit would kind of be May, June. And then the general plan is to really have this all figured out and look for adoption by JPACT and Metro Council into that June, July window. So I can pause there and welcome your thoughts and guidance discussion just on the step 2 portion, and then we'll touch those TPAC and MTAC updates. So pause there and happy to answer any questions or take any direction from you.
Hey, Mayor Milch.
So it looks like for our March 19th meeting, we could have some results from some evaluation already having been done by the other committees. Should we actively watch that March 7th meeting? Will there be something published that shows these ratings and criteria that we can use in, helping to make an informed decision on the 19th about what we want to recommend or not recommend?
Sure, absolutely. So as long as everything stays on track from the Metro team doing all the work, we expect that they would include those materials even in just a week and a half, the Friday before that TPAC meeting. So on the 28th, we expect to have that information. that we could even at that time start to absorb, and then TPAC as a committee will discuss it on March 7th. So yes, we will have that information well ahead of the March meeting.
Okay. I have a question, not sure who can answer it, but as always, I'm going to bring that word back in, criteria. The criteria that the step 2 will be evaluated on, I think, again, this has been something that, obviously the policies or the policy direction given by JPAC ideally will help shape some of that criteria. Can you someone giving me a thumbnail sketch of how these projects, is a criteria wide enough to properly evaluate all of these? Will it be separated into trails and or transit and or safety and a number of the pillars that we all value again? So I'm just curious as to how that will be done. Is it just one set of criteria for all of them?
I welcome Councilor Lewis, of course, to chime in if she's aware. I believe what the Metro team is doing is for step 2, it does tick off all those things you mentioned and more. There's quite a large menu of what project submittals had to answer. And that was things like how many jobs within certain distances of the projects. Generally speaking, they can be scored as if they're very similar. So I would expect some degree of commonality between all the projects. They are basically, generally speaking, improvements in sidewalks, bike lanes, multi-use paths, et cetera, that are fairly similar. So I would expect a bit of an apples to apples result.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
So I'd also point out that the program direction that we talked about previously has a lot of detail about the selection criteria. On the step 2 side, that's something that happens on a regular basis. So there's a lot of foundation that they build upon, but with each cycle, there's always something a little bit different. So for the last cycle, some of you may remember that there were investments not only for regional flexible funds that were being discussed, but there was also a parks and nature bond funding there was the conversation about that happened at the same time. And so for this particular round, we're not having that same parallel conversation. So there won't be kind of as much emphasis, or we won't be hearing about those type of projects as much. But I would say that the criteria for the RFFA and for this cycle, there was kind of a significant amount of information within the program direction that also helped guide the applications.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to also say what Karen just said, which is that we don't have the trails money separate this year. So we're not using this application as the same application for trails funds. The other split that you may remember from the past is we used to have a specific set aside for freight mobility. And we had a number of projects that applied in the last cycle where we did have that set aside, and they applied for both the multimodal and the freight. And it actually made them quite competitive, but it also really showed that we don't need to have that set aside. So there's not an artificial division between the multimodal, between the neighborhood scale and the freight projects.
Okay. And because we have so many new folks here, can someone speak to, and maybe particularly with this step 2 RUFA this year, will match or overmatch be a factor in promoting a project? And maybe explain for some of the new folks what the match typically does. Usually it's right around 10%, as I recall, roughly. I know that's a broad number, but if someone could just chime in on that, I appreciate it.
Sure, at least briefly, happy to start that. It's basically kind of a little bit of a federal pass-through match requirement for local entities. 10.27 is the magic number, to be specific. And I don't yet know, I don't believe there was that much of an incentive for overmatch. So my understanding is generally most all the projects submitted simply did note and commit that 10.27 as local match.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a great list of projects. I know where each of those roughly are, and so we'll see how it goes. It's too bad it's oversubscribed, as Jeff, you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And so with this conversation, I guess what I would do to wrap up is what I've heard is we can come back at the next C4 Metro meeting and provide the information that we learned about how each of our projects, how the projects within Clackamas County had scored, right? So then we get a better idea, and C4 Metro kind of has that understanding of how they were evaluated and how we see them, the potential for them being funded by this funding source. And at that particular time, there can be additional conversation about whether or not there's a need for kind of deeper review by our technical committee to help provide guidance if there is information or priorities that want to be submitted during the opportunity to do that. There's a coordinating committee comment letter that can be submitted at the end of May. So anyway, you haven't stopped hearing from us, I think is the point here.
Karen, you brought up one thing I just thought of, and that is there any advantage or timing, whether it be C4 Metro Subcommittee or C4, the larger body, to chime in on some of these selections or recommendations? Let's just say going back to the step one. Is there opportunity today, or do you think it's more proper to do it at this next C4 meeting in March?
So I will say that there's the step one project evolves with each step, with each place of the process, right? So it's learning as we're growing, and I would advocate and probably for the larger C4 group being able to provide comment within that public comment period that will be open. Right now, we know, and we had the conversation today that provides support for the conversation that will happen tomorrow, that will give even more direction about what will go into the public comment period. And that decision then will be made by JPAC in March. But then there's the overall public comment period. So perhaps for step one, there might be 2 points, is if there's an interest in getting a more formalized comment from C4 into the March conversation, that may be valuable. And then having the conversation during the public comment period. So does that help? I think I provided you with 2 different answers there.
Yeah, that does help. And if anyone has any preference in our audience here today, I think we'll likely try to tee that up for the March meeting, I guess, to have some letter of recommendation, whether whatever's prime and ready. So thank you. I certainly see on the agenda that there's not any impact materials. Jamie, for impact, are we way ahead of schedule and there's not much else to talk about, or what do you see next?
Right. If the group is ready to move on from JPAC items, we could talk about a recap from the last MPAC meeting. However, MTAC, the staff technical group, has not met.
Okay. So before we close out JPAC or RUFA step 1 and 2, any other comments from our members here today? Okay. Jamie?
Apologies. I also want to recognize the TPAC update.
Okay. So let's proceed.
Excellent. Laura, if you are available to join, we have many city representatives within Clackamas County as well. And a few are out today. And thank you, Laura, for helping out. So in the back of your packet, we do have a brief TPAC summary of recent items with a few items looking ahead. Want to give many thanks to Adam Torres, part of our team that really does a great job pulling these together. Laura, would you like to maybe screen share and run through just a couple of highlights at a high level?
Sure. Thank you so much. Good morning. Is my video okay? Sorry, skipped a little bit there. All right. So TPAC met roughly 2 weeks ago, and a couple of things. First is we had our fatal crash update. Unfortunately, we had 6 traffic deaths across all 3 counties in January, and half of those were in Clackamas County. We'll continue to do the work to make sure that we have safe streets as much as we can. We did have a transit update as well. In 2024, the region achieved over 75 million rides, which was a 9% increase from 2023. That was a good thing. We also had our typical monthly MTIP amendment. So the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program amendments is something we do every month. The MTIP records how all federal transportation money is spent, and it also monitors state and locally funded projects that may significantly affect the region's air quality. So we added 3 new planning projects. The first was reconnecting 82nd Avenue Community Planning Study. So this is a study of bus rapid transit that connects disadvantaged communities to jobs, education, economic opportunity, public space, and parks. Next is a TV highway community connections planning study. So similar bus rapid transit study that connects disadvantaged communities to jobs, education, economic opportunity, public space, and parks. And the third is a new Metro Regional Rail planning study. So it's funded by a Senate bill to alleviate the use of existing heavy freight rail assets in metro area for passenger rail alternatives to help augment existing transportation modes. We did have one project, that got canceled from the MTIP, and that was a rail crossing on Lombard and around 11th. And that was removed just because as they dug into the details, the cost got a little bit high. Separate from that, we had an MTIP amendment for the I-5 Rose Quarter project. That was separate just because the approval process is slightly different. The MTIP amendment process involved proof of funding verification from the Oregon Transportation Commission, project level modeling reviews, just to confirm consistency with regional transportation plan, Federal Highway Administration approval to ensure alignment with federal funding requirements. That was a lot of words. Essentially, we're looking at the first couple phases, phase 1A and phase 1. 1A would be anticipated to start in 2025, which is a $60 million investment on early infrastructure. So it includes things like stormwater upgrades to I-405 and bridge preservation improvements near the I-84 interchange. It also has some seismic resiliency enhancements and a potential extension of the southbound auxiliary lane to the Morrison Bridge. Phase 1 is after that, starting in 2027, and that's $177 million investment to start doing the first section of highway cover. It also includes multimodal street enhancements and constructs additional portions of north and southbound auxiliary lanes, as well as new sign bridges for improved traffic operations. We talked about step 1A.1 that Karen discussed earlier. We also had a quick update on our comprehensive climate action plan update, which is a 20-year strategy aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions across the broader 7-county metro area, so bigger than we're used to looking at. And that's part of an ongoing effort by EPA's climate pollution reduction grants. And we'll continue to incorporate updated emissions inventory, projections of current policies and those effects, and then list priority actions aimed at achieving state and regional climate goals. Lastly, we had a 2023 Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, implementation update. So as you're aware, we have the three big projects: Montgomery Park Streetcar Extension, 82nd Avenue Transit Project, and TV Highway Transit Project. We talked about some of those earlier today as well. They've completed their locally preferred alternative approvals and are moving forward. Looking forward, we're still working on implementation priorities such as climate start strategy, refining regional mobility policy, and supporting the local transportation system plan updates that will all implement the RTP. We do have another RTP update coming in 2028 already, so soon. In March, we're going to dig into the step 1A1 and the step 2 rougher projects, and that's it for TPAC.
Thank you, Laura. Questions, comments? Great. Councilor Lewis, are you still with us? I have a question for you before I get too far adrift.
I'm here. I'm trying to map my route to the dentist, but I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So Laura spoke to, brought up the RTPs around the corner, right? Couple 3 years away. I was wondering, just to not let go of that regional imbalance that I speak to, do you think that's somehow, just thinking ahead, not that we take any action, obviously, but just thinking ahead, I want to just plant the seed if there's a way maybe we can make a more significant statement or policy direction that kind of addresses that radical imbalance.
In terms of preparation for the next RTP, I think that's absolutely appropriate. In terms of doing something different than the current adopted RTP, I think that gets hard.
I'm talking about it. The first
So
part.
yeah, I think that totally makes sense. As long as you're not trying to deviate from, I mean, like the current plan is the current plan, but as we are on the far front end of, starting to do the process again, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I certainly would again encourage us somehow, maybe next time you and I sit down and chat, maybe we can figure out how we put something together looking ahead to make that number one, a stronger statement, a stronger need, and just factor in hopefully some commute shed work that might be forthcoming, and also transit service or underserved service levels around the region to make sure we're doing that more scientifically and with more metrics than we are just, the current practice where we just it seems to be, again, more a focus on the RTP seem to be driven by how we try to reduce emissions, or get the biggest bang for the buck to try to meet some of that criteria. And it seems to me that we're leaving a big chunk of the region off the table. And I know that the suburban areas are harder to serve or harder to meet those needs, but it also seems by the commute shed growth where things are going that we can't let that type of housing population or the commute shed aspect, we just can't ignore that and still be responsible from meeting our regional climate requirements. It would seem, and so long-winded discussion for another day, but I just want to set that on the table and think how we kind of advance that a little bit. Thank you. Jamie, anything else for today?
No, unless you'd care to provide updates from the last MPAC meeting.
If someone's prepared to do that.
I think I see Mayor Buck coming off mute.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think I was at the last MPAC meeting.
Alrighty, then I think we're good to go.
Okay, great. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. And for those who will be watching, we'll see you all tomorrow morning. Goodbye. We're adjourned.